So welcome to everybody to the fifth encounter. Today, Mileni will present the session, so I will just get straight to this, I guess. Before we do it, before I give the word to Mileni, I would like to say who she is. I mean, I will just say a little bit of who she is, because she is a great person who does many things, many different things, and has been doing many different things. Like, for example, she studied English language first in the bachelor, and then she went on into applied linguistics. 2018, she moved, then before 2018, she moved to University of Potsdam, where she concluded her PhD in 2018. And very soon she will be guest professor at the European University of Jena, professor of media, culture, and communication. So we are very excited for the students and the colleagues that Mileni will have. And very excited to hear what she will experience there. So Mileni, please present the experts we have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luisa. So we are going to start this encounter. Maybe I can stop sharing for a while because soon our speakers are going to share their screens. Okay, so as you know, we have two speakers, and we're going to have a similar structure as the ones we had for the previous encounters. And so we have Adam will speak first, and then Alex will speak, and then I'll have some questions to both of them so that they engage in a short discussion, and then we're going to open the floor for questions and comments and reflections from the audience. So then I think we're all set, and we could start getting into talk one, which is by Adam Brandt. So I'm going to read the notes I have here about Adam Brandt's academic journey to today. And so Adam is a senior lecturer in applied linguistics at Newcastle University. And he obtained his PhD in 2011. And in 2013, he was appointed lecturer in applied linguistics at the same university. In between the conclusion of the PhD and the start of his position as lecturer, he spent 2 years as a JSPS postdoctoral research fellow at Kansai University in Osaka, Japan. Adam's areas of interest include social interaction, intercultural communication, international workplaces, and technologies for communication. He is especially interested in social interaction and analyzes video recordings of real-life communication using the research methods of conversation analysis and membership categorization analysis. He is a member of the Multimodal Analysis Research Group, MARG, a research forum for staff and students interested in using these methods for the analysis of social interaction. Recently, Adam has been interested in social interaction in asymmetrical settings, in which speakers have different sets of communicative repertoires. He is also interested in technologized interaction, that is, contexts in which speakers interact through or with technologies. I got to know Adam's work because of some pieces he wrote on the analysis of intercultural interactions from an ethnomethodological conversation analytic perspective. And those pieces are from 2008 or 2009, so written during his PhD, I reckon. And he also wrote a chapter on conversation analysis with Christian Mortensen, which was published in 2016 in the volume Research Methods in Intercultural Communication, edited by Duhua. I also had the pleasure to meet Adam in online data sessions and to experience his analytical competencies live, virtually. And now I am delighted to hear about his current reflections on ethnomethodological conversation analysis and digital intercultural communication. It is a big pleasure to have you with us, Adam.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you to all of the ReDICo team for inviting me to be part of this series of encounters. It's a real privilege to be part of the project and also to be speaking alongside some real experts in our field or in lots of different fields. So I really, really appreciate this opportunity. And I hope I can contribute some way with something interesting. Just before I start, just to touch back on some of the things Melanie said there about my research so far. So my PhD research was on a particular digital context, which I'll mention today. Like a lot of research on technologies for communication, as soon as you finish the research, that technology has become obsolete. And so you feel like the research is a little bit dated. But for this presentation today, I actually thought it would be quite interesting to go back to some historical digital intercultural interaction and then do some comparisons across to some more contemporary digital contexts. So I think that might be quite interesting, even though the technology is pretty much obsolete now. The other caveat I want to add is just that I've actually tweaked things a little bit from the abstract that you might have read before this talk, partly in response to some of the topics and encounters that we've had previously, and also partly to try and align with what I anticipate from Alex's presentation today. So the abstract mentioned about conversational AI, and that is an area that I'm working on quite a lot with Spencer Hazel, but I'm not going to actually touch on AI today, partly because I think AI has been covered on the encounters so far in really illuminating and original ways. And I just thought maybe it'd be better to shift the focus back into different kinds of digital encounters for today's presentation. So with that all said, the focus then really is to think more about affordances and practices, affordances that digital spaces can allow for communication, but also conversely the constraints that certain digital platforms can place on communication. And what impact that has on the practices that we use for our interactions. And as Melanie said, my research is through an ethnomethodological conversation analysis approach. So we're really generally looking at spoken interactions when we're using CA. It has been used for different kinds of written interaction, but predominantly the principles and analytic procedures work best for spoken interaction. So thinking about those things today and also thinking about how interculturality fits in. What is the role of interculturality and what are the implications for interculturality when we're thinking about technical constraints and affordances of digital spaces for communicative practices. So just a real rough outline, I'm going to touch very briefly for those who might not be so familiar on conversation analysis, how conversation analysis relates to the study of interculturality, how conversation analysis relates to the study of technologized social interaction. I'm going to do that fairly quickly so then we can really spend the majority of the time looking at some of my analytic observations from two different digital contexts, particularly with a focus on looking at turn taking and topic initiation and development. And then I hope you'll all indulge me. Usually with CA, I and most researchers tend to stick to the analysis, but I think at the end of this talk, I will try and have a little bit of speculation and kind of broader theorizing beyond the data, which I think fits in with the spirit of the encounters so far. So with an EMCA, ethnomethodological conversation analysis approach to social interaction, we're really interested in what people do and how they do it when they come together for various social institutional purposes. Not so much interested in the why people do things, their motivations, their perceptions, their feelings. That kind of research is often considered to be beyond the remit of CA. We're really interested in the what and the how. In a little bit more detail, you can see an example of a piece of data with a transcript there. We're looking at social action in interaction. So what are the different communicative practices that people employ in order to perform certain social actions? And one kind of thing which underpins this is how do people achieve mutual understanding? How do they maintain that through their encounters? And where there are threats to mutual understanding, how are they restored? CA research aspires to take a radically emic perspective. So we're really looking at how the participants treat for themselves and for each other in that moment, what is relevant and how is that relevant? And we use fine-grained analysis supported by the transcript of the like you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. How does that then apply to interculturality? So from a CA perspective, interculturality is really seen as a social achievement. It's something that people, when they come together and interact, they achieve interculturality through their social conduct. So it's not starting from the position that people are from different cultural backgrounds and therefore they will behave differently, but it's through the behaviors of orienting to somebody as an expert, or orienting to somebody as a novice, or orienting to cultural differences that is actually achieved through interactional conduct. Another way of thinking about that then is that people's cultural identities can be used as interactional resources, things that we can use to achieve certain things in our interactions. And we'll illustrate that a little bit through the analysis, I hope. And again, on that point of radically emic perspective, the book chapter that Melanie mentioned that Christian Mortensen and I wrote, we said this, which I think, I'm not crazy about quoting myself, but I think it's quite a nice kind of summary of what we're trying to get at with this conversation analysis process, which is essentially that as researchers, how do we deal with this tension of, if we want to look at intercultural communication, but we don't want to categorize our participants in a certain way a priori, then how do we get around that? Well, one of the things with the CA approach is that we can see how the people we're researching categorize themselves and categorize each other through their interactions with each other. In terms of technologized social interaction, then, this concept of fractured ecologies, I think, is really important. This is an idea from Luff et al. Sorry, there's a typo there. It's from Paul Luff, who talks about if we're interacting in digital spaces, where a practice is performed may occur in a different space to where the practice is received. So if you think about this Zoom platform, where I am using particular gestural practices in my explanations, they're happening in this physical space where I'm located, but they're being received by you in the physical space that you're located. So our interactional space is fractured across digital space. Ian Hutchby also talked about this concept of affordances and constraints of technologies, and these vary across different platforms. So where the telephone might have certain affordances, for example, that people can speak to each other across long distances, the constraints of the telephone is that people can't see one another. So interaction has to be adapted accordingly because of the constraints and the affordances of the platform. And again, obviously, different technologies lead to different affordances and constraints. Another interesting point that's been made more recently is that as technological change takes place over time, then interactional practices may adapt as well, not necessarily just in those technological spaces, but more broadly. And it's been argued that, for example, something like the telephone and mobile telephone communication, or landline telephone, how that's become kind of obsolete. There are certain interactional practices that have now become historical as that technology has become obsolete. So certain interactional practices become obsolete alongside the technology in which they were used. I think that's a really interesting idea that we might want to come back to. Okay, so that's very brief whistle-stop kind of background of the kind of analytic and theoretical framework that we're taking with this kind of approach. I want to move in to look at some analytic observations from two different digital spaces then. And again, with conversation analysis, we're looking at spoken interaction, particularly in these digital spaces. So the two settings that I'd like to look at today. From my PhD thesis, voice-only chat rooms, which were available through Skype. So Skype is obviously still a platform which exists for voice over internet protocols. So voice calls that are made over, or video calls as well that are made over the internet. Around the late 2000s, Skype offered this service called Skypecasts, where people could come into a chat room and they could speak to other people from around the world without seeing one another. So it kind of predated video-mediated interaction as we have here. It was voice-only chat rooms, lots of different people in a kind of voice-only chat room. And I want to contrast that with video conferencing platforms, which we're all much more used to, especially kind of post-COVID pandemic. And particularly looking at Zoom, which is obviously the platform that we're using right here and now. So in terms of culture, you could consider these to be kind of cultural third spaces, in that there isn't really a host culture either in terms of physical space, but also in terms of normative practices, normative expectations. So if you think about kind of, there isn't a national cultural home or a regional cultural home in this kind of digital space, but there aren't any established expectations that people bring in with them from their kind of physical backgrounds in terms of how to communicate. What are the established practices for introducing yourself? What are the established politeness norms and so on? These are things that have to be figured out in situ by the people who are coming together. So with that, and with the issues of technological affordances and technological constraints, there are interactional challenges that people have to meet. And as I said before, some of the things I'd like to look at here are practices for turn taking. How do people manage who speaks when in these platforms that have different constraints and affordances? But also topic initiation and topic development. What do people talk about and how do they determine what to talk about in these kind of spaces? And especially when we think about interculturality, how do people initiate and develop topics vis-a-vis cultural knowledge or expectations of cultural knowledge? How do you know what somebody knows or what somebody doesn't know when you're coming together in these kind of cultural third spaces online? So first of all, turn-taking practices. Here's an example from the Skypecast voice-only interactions. We've got people coming together into a chat room which was categorized only as come here to speak English, come here to improve your English, come here to practice your English. There was no topic assigned other than if you're in this room, speak to each other in English. They were arranged online, so there was no kind of physical organization or in-person organization before they happened online. And it was multi-party interactions between people who were unacquainted. So people who don't know one another, they haven't been told what to talk about, and they've got to figure these things out for themselves on the fly. Here's a first example where we've got 4 people getting to know one another. And one of them, as Veronica has just introduced herself, and she said she's from China. Andre has then made a kind of inappropriate comment about women from China. Oh, I really like girls from China or something like that. And so Jin is trying to change the topic and move into a new topic with the other people in the room and kind of push Andre out of off the floor, as it were.
Mm-hmm. So what do, you guys? Samir and Veronica.
I am a student.
So what do you study then?
I study business.
International journalism.
I study business.
Oh, so Veronica, you study journalism, right?
Okay, so this is an example that is fairly typical within the corpus that I collected, and I just want to think about this in terms of challenges for turn taking. So first of all, as I said, Jin is just trying to shift the conversation away from Andre, who said something fairly inappropriate. And so in moving that forward and kind of selecting other people to speak, she says, so what do, you guys? Now, one of the challenges here is it's not really clear who should be the next speaker. It doesn't nominate a next speaker. And in the absence of physical presence, it's not possible to nominate the next speaker through gesturing or through eye contact, for example. So she adds a caveat. She adds in a little bit extra more detail, Samir and Veronica. So we can see here, she's asking the question, what do, you guys, Samir and Veronica? So we know Andre is not to select the next speaker, despite possibly there at line 4, taking an in-breath because he's about to say something. But it's still not clear who's going to speak next, or who Jin is nominating to speak next. So then we get a little bit of a hesitation, we get some background noise and coughing, and then Veronica kind of hesitantly takes the floor. Short pause, I'm a student. So although it wasn't clear that she should be the next speaker, she's kind of reluctantly taken the floor. And then Jin asks a follow-up question, so what do you study then? And then we get 5.2 seconds where Veronica doesn't follow up to answer that, possibly because Samir is still one of the people who was nominated back at lines 1 and 2, and he still hasn't had a chance to respond. And then what we get is both Samir and Veronica coming in at exactly the same time. Samir answering the very first question about what do you do, and Veronica answering the follow-up question, what do you study? So overlapping talk, and the people can't see each other, and it's starting to get a little bit messy. A pause, and then Samir tries to repeat quickly, I study business. More of a hesitation, and then Jin says, okay, so both people have answered now. What does Jin do to develop the topic further? So Veronica, you study journalism, right? So it's a little bit messy in terms of who speaks when, and when somebody speaks, how do they get responded to? And this was quite common in the corpus when there's people who don't know each other, and there's multiple people in the room and they can't see one another. So multi-party turn taking is challenged by the absence of visual cues. It's kind of like they're interacting in the dark. And so social practice have to be adapted in situ so that people can know when it's their turn to speak and when they're expected to speak and so on. Contrast that then to video conferencing platforms like the kind we have here, In this setting, again, we have people coming together for cultural exchange or for chatting. In this particular setting, these events started to take place on in person originally, and then because of the pandemic, they shifted online. Again, like the Skype casts, there's no assigned topic. And again, like the Skype casts, these are mostly unacquainted interactions involving lots of different people. So some comparisons, some similarities, some differences between the Skype cast example that we've just seen. For this extract, I can't play the video. I don't have permission to play the video, so we're just going to work through the transcript, where we've got Tanya, Violet, Jerry, and a bunch of other people who are all part of this community. And the point is local people in this region meeting international students to kind of do a cultural exchange, language practice kind of thing. So here we've got people can see each other on the screen, and Tanya says, do you want to kick it off? And then Violet says, yeah, of course. So we can see that Violet is the person who's going to kind of chair the session, or she's going to control the interaction in a way. And she nominates Jerry. Jerry, you're the person to my left, so we're going to start with you. So here we get an orientation to Violet selecting the next speaker by name, and other people can see who Jerry is by the name tag that's connected to his part of the screen, but also she's orienting to her visual display. You're the person on my left, and that's why I'm going to ask you to speak first. So there's an orientation, there's a kind of explicit announcement of the physical arrangement of the screen and why that person is being selected to speak next. Additionally, we then get Violet saying, and you've also just taken a gulp of tea as well, haven't you? Jerry saying, yes, I have, before he says, hello, everyone. So again, because there's now visual access, Violet is able to observe what Jerry's doing and observe that he's just taking a drink of tea before he's able to say hello to everyone. Just as Jerry at line 13 says, hello, everyone, a few people start to wave like that on the screen, which you can see in the screen grab. So a little bit different just by virtue of having visual access to the other people. And obviously what Violet sees on her screen may be different to what Jerry sees on his screen in terms of the arrangement of the participants, but at least there's additional resources to draw upon. Slightly different affordances in this space compared to the voice-only space. But still, resources for turn-taking have to be adapted. So gaze work doesn't really work here. You can't look to certain parts of the screen and know that that person then recognizes they're nominated. Gestures have to adapt because we might be working in this kind of square space that we're kind of framed by. So a gesture has to be like this rather than, you know, we might wave, we might adapt our physical conduct because of the framing of what visual access other people have for us. And again, the name tags are there as a resource. We can link somebody's visible actions to their name and to their voice through the Zoom name tag. So again, there are constraints and affordances in this setting, but they're very different than the voice-only setting. Okay, shifting across to some observations about topic initiation and topic development then. Again, as we said, there's no assigned topic. These parties don't know one another. They're just kind of told, you got to speak to each other. They just join the room because they want to speak to each other. I won't go through the next couple of examples, but just to show you, we get a lot of this in the data set. Nobody's speaking. Let's talk about something. What shall we talk about? Yeah, bring something up, inspire us. Okay, I can't think of anything really. And then lots of people doing other things in the background, which we can't see, but we can hear, like typing sounds. So this is really prevalent through the corpus as well. People haven't been assigned a topic. They don't have any real ostensible purpose to be talking other than to talk. And that poses challenges. Hi, nobody's talking at all at line 8. Yeah, yes, here, yeah, haha, laughter. But then what we get here at line 21 to 22 is, so Velson, where are you from? And this is a really common initiating topic, a topic initiating device that's used in this platform. Where are you from? And then when people disclose where they're from, they tend to give their country. And often when people introduce themselves, they'll give their country first, even before they give their name or their gender identity or anything like that. And so there seems to be an orientation, again, thinking about interculturality, there seems to be an orientation to their nationality is the most relevant thing about them in this space. Further than that, the nationality is often used as a springboard to initiate some discussion. So we'll get national cultural identities oriented to as a primary relevant thing about them, and then that's used as a resource to kind of initiate and develop a topic. So when somebody discloses they're from Japan, somebody might respond and say, oh, I've been there. Is it true that, or I've been there and this thing happened, is that common? Or do you know such and such a movie from Japan? I saw that recently. So once somebody discloses their national cultural identity, it is a bit of a springboard for topic initiation. And we'll see an example of this here, where Amun, who's from Turkey, is talking to Jin and James, who are both from Korea. He's just learned they're both from Korea, and so he tries to establish some of his cultural knowledge about Korea in relation to an individual Turkish person based in Korea.
South Korea is a Turkish football trainer, you know?
Yes.
You know this trainer?
I need.
Seoul.
Yeah.
Where is Seoul? Şenol Güneş is the football trainer. FC Seoul.
So you can see here he's trying to establish that there's a Turkish football coach working in Korea, and he's asking if they know who this is. But then there's a little bit of uncertainty. So at line 11, we get, where is Seoul? Have I got this right? Is Seoul in Korea? So there's a little bit of confusion. And it goes on.
FC Seoul.
FC Seoul, yes, that's right. Oh, yeah.
You know this trainer?
I don't
You
know.
heard it from this trainer?
James, you should help him. I don't know what he's talking about, actually.
And we find this happens quite often, that they'll try to initiate a new topic, but if there isn't this kind of shared cultural knowledge, then we get to a bit of a conversational dead end. Here's another example I'll just run through quite quickly. Andre's just discovered that Jin is from Korea. And he says, do you know the movie I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay? And then we get this little bit of moment when Jin's trying to establish who she's speaking to. Andre, is that you? And he says, yeah. And she says, you're still here. Okay, I'm a bit confused now. And then he repeats the question again. This time when he repeats the question, he provides an account for why he's asking that question to her. So have you watched the movie I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay? It's quite popular in Asia now. So some display of his expectation that she might know it because she's just disclosed she's from Korea, which is within Asia, and this is popular in Asia. No, I don't think so. And then he says, okay. And again, we get a bit of a conversational dead end. It doesn't go any further than that. If Andre had actually tried to take the conversation further or shared some resources about the movie I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay, we might have established that it's actually a Korean movie, which he didn't disclose. And then there might have been some opportunity, I don't know, this is speculation, for Jin to say, I haven't heard of that, but I know that actor, or, to then develop the topic a little bit further. But he didn't provide any more information than the name of the movie. And we get this conversational dead end. So again, we see that these national cultural identities and expectations or assumptions about cultural practices or cultural artifacts are oriented to as a primary relevant thing, and they're used as a resource for topic initiation. But often this can lead to conversational dead ends when there isn't really that kind of joint knowledge or joint awareness of the thing under discussion. Again, then contrasting that with the video conferencing Zoom platform. Here we've got a bunch of people discussing their cultural traditions, their cultural events and celebrations. And Meena has just disclosed that she's Hindu, and was just mentioning Diwali, the Diwali festival, which is part of Hinduism.
Yeah, because like what you say, a lot of traditions and celebrations are based on religion, isn't it? Yeah. Should I search up a picture just so we can see what it is? Because I've never actually seen how it looks like. You can tell me if this is accurate.
Yes.
Yeah. Do people come together and light candles in one specific spot, or is it like all over?
Normally, no, but if you want, yes, you can do it.
So here we've got Amy trying to develop the topic a little bit further. And she says, yeah, because like what you say, a lot of traditions and celebrations are based on religion, isn't it? And then again, we get this little bit of a stumble. The topic isn't really going very far. We get the other two participants nodding, and then we get Amy kind of quietly saying, yeah, and then we get a bit of a long pause. So it's kind of not really going anywhere, again, as we saw in the previous examples. But here, Amy does something different, which is an affordance of the video conferencing platform. should I search up the picture to see what it is? Because I've never actually seen how it looks like. And so we then get Amy clearly doing something on her screen and then sharing the screen and saying, can you tell me if this is accurate? So she shares the screen with Google image results for Festival of Light Diwali, and she's scrolling through the screen and she's asking questions. So first of all, Mina confirms, yes, this is what it looks like. And then Amy says, do people like come together and light candles in one specific spot, or is it like all over? And as she's doing this, she's moving the cursor around, kind of pointing with the cursor to particular images. So here she's using the screen sharing resource as a way of kind of trying to get the topic developed and trying to get the conversation going. And indeed it does work. Mina does start to provide a little bit more information about the kind of customs of Diwali and then continues to talk about it after the excerpt. I'll just briefly show this example as well. George is talking to some international students from China, and he's talking about some of his knowledge of part of China and Chinese history.
But in Xi'an, there is a stele, S-T-E-L-E, a stone with writings.
S-T-E-L-E?
S-T-E-L-E. A stone.
Yeah.
With writing about this sort of Christian group who live near Chang'an.
So again, with the other examples, we see a case of somebody who has some cultural knowledge about another place, and he's trying to share that to try and kind of find some common ground. But here, so in the FC Seoul example that we saw, the Turkish football trainer, there was a little bit of spelling aloud, FC Seoul. And here we get something similar, a stele, E-S-T-L-E, a stone with writings. But as he's doing this, he's also actually kind of doing this gestural conduct, which is visible on the screen. So he's saying a stone with writings. So part of the explanation that he's able to give, because of the affordances of the video conferencing platform, is using embodied conduct to support his explanation, to establish this joint point of reference, which is the stele. And we see Ray, the student, checking the spelling and then leaning forward, and presumably he's doing, we don't know for sure, but it looks like he's doing some kind of search to establish what is a stele. And then we see, somehow he's got it. And we can assume, and presumably George can assume as well, he's got it because he's been searching for what this thing is. So again, this platform, some of the affordances for topic development and topic initiation. The gestural conduct is available to help achieve intersubjectivity in a way that it isn't in voice only, but also screen sharing is available as a resource for developing the topic. So you can actually say, here's a picture of something that I know is associated with your kind of cultural identity. Please, can you tell us more about it? Some more speculative thoughts, which are not really from the analysis then. In the almost 20 years between the first data set and the second, maybe there's also more of a global popular culture. So things like K-pop bands like Blackpink are really known around the world much more than in the past, I think, is probably the case. So I think there's a shift in popular culture, which might mean that shared cultural knowledge is kind of getting closer. I think there's also potentially changes in digital multimodal practices over time. So perhaps people are more adept now or more adept at talking online while also searching for something, trying to get up the information that the other person's talking about. So being able to multitask in digital spaces perhaps is more advanced now than 20 years ago. And perhaps, again, speculation, there's a greater intercultural awareness over the last 20 years. So people are a bit more, it's a generalization, I think, but perhaps people who go into online spaces for cultural exchange are now more able and likely to be able to have some awareness of the different cultural practices that they're talking about. So just the last couple of minutes then, just to quickly offer some reflections on that and then a little bit of speculation. So this concept of phygital practices is something that Dua and Toft have talked about fairly recently. So this is how communicative practices which pull together physical resources and digital resources into these kind of multimodal gestalts. So I think we saw that in the video conferencing data where somebody is gesturing and talking to provide an explanation, and that's being produced in an online space. Or somebody is doing a screen sharing, pointing with the cursor as they're talking. So it's a mixture of the physical and the digital resources that are available. As I said, Dewey and Toft first talked about this a couple of years ago, and they said the overall consensus on phygitality is that it relates to human computational interface experiences as being simultaneously physical and connected to the internet. And so usually this is associated with things like virtual reality and mixed reality, augmented reality, and so on. However, the core idea of phygitality does not need to encompass this radical implementation of an Internet of Things device, because really basic computational interfaces like PCs have for a long time afforded precisely the kind of interplay between physical and digital actions. So when they're talking about this, they're really talking about people in a workspace looking at a computer screen together, and somebody's pointing with their finger, but also pointing with the cursor at the same time. So using a digital resource, the cursor, and using a physical resource, the gesturing, at the same time to produce this phygital gestalt. And obviously we know that this is really common practice in everyday life now, that people bring digital devices in to support their face-to-face interactions. So here you can see somebody giving an explanation and showing an image on the phone to help provide that explanation. But I think which hasn't been talked about quite so much is that the reverse is true. So while we're bringing digital resources increasingly into our physical spaces, changes in technological affordances are allowing us to bring our physical resources into digital spaces. So when we had voice only, we weren't able to bring our gestural conduct, for example, into the digital interactions. And now that's changed. On top of that, layering on top of that, we've then got bringing interculturality into these spaces as well. And it becomes increasingly complex. So trying to think about a visualization of this, if we think about physical interaction resources being things like our spoken conduct, our gesture, our gaze conduct, the use of physical objects in our surrounding environment. Then we think about our intercultural interactional resources, cultural knowledge, cultural expertise, cultural expectations, and the overlap there would be intercultural interactions. Then if we also think about digital interaction resources, like how we can share screen, how we can point people towards things online through cursor usage and so on, then the overlap there is digital interactions like we have here in Zoom. Where all three things interlap, then we might think about those as phygital intercultural interaction. So the physical, the digital, and the intercultural all coming together and us being able to draw upon such a wide array of resources to facilitate those interactions. So in terms of the future of digital interculturality, then I think I'm not trying to say that we're cyborgs, and I think that's fine. You know, we're not saying that the digital and the physical is becoming part of the same entity, but at the same time, with each new evolving digital space, spoken interaction practices can be adapted in different ways. And I think we will see a continued intertwining of physical and digital resources in settings like, for example, robot avatars, which are becoming, you know, it's not a robot in and of itself, but it's an avatar for a human to operate remotely. Things like hologram avatars. So Loughborough University here in the UK trialing these hologram avatars where a person can be standing and speaking in one space and then an avatar is being portrayed through hologram in another physical space. And then, of course, kind of obviously virtual reality where our physical conduct is affecting what we're doing in the digital VR space. So I think we're going to see a continued intertwining of physical and digital interactional resources and practices for communication in these kind of ever-changing digital spaces. What it means for interculturality and how interculturality itself might change, or how we might invoke interculturality differently in these different spaces, I think is a question that I'm not really ready to answer, but maybe something we can speculate on in the future. Okay, I think I'm probably well over time, so I'd just like to say thank you all very much and looking forward to discussion.
All right. Thanks a lot. Very, very interesting. I think there is a lot of room for discussions later on. But you're right on time, so you're not, it didn't take too long. Great. Thank you very much. All right, so then I think we are ready to move on to talk to by Alexandra Georgakopoulou-Nunes. I rehearsed this so much and I'm pretty sure it's coming.
The Georgakopoulou is amazing. How did you do it? In all of you.
All right, so let me introduce then Alex, much easier. Alex is Professor of Discourse Analysis and Sociolinguistics at King's College London. And her focus is on communication and how ordinary people present themselves and relate to others in significant socialization contexts, for example, families, friendship groups, schools, and social media platforms. She has specifically examined the role of everyday life stories and the formation of social relationships in feminist and youth identity politics. This work has led to the development of small stories research, a paradigm for studying identities through narrative. Alex's current research interests include small stories research on social media, especially Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Alex is co-lead of the Center for Language, Discourse and Communication at King's and chair of the Postgraduate Research Committee. She's also co-editor of the book series Routledge Studies in Narrative, Interaction, and Discourse, together with Anna Defina and Ruth Page. And moreover, she has supervised around 50 PhD students working on a wide range of languages and cultures. Among her various publications, I'd like to highlight the 2016 Routledge Handbook of Language and Digital Communication, edited with Teresa Spigliotti, and the 2022 article, Small Stories as Curated Formats on Social Media, the Intersection of Affordances, Values, and Practices. Well, I've also met Alex in online data sessions, and I tried to meet her in London, but we kept on missing each other. Last time I was in London, she was in Hamburg, actually. So I went to the UK, and then she came to Germany. I hope I'm luckier the next time. Well, in the meantime, I'm happy to have found an appointment to bring her and Adam to our ReDICo series. Thank you very much, Alex, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, very pleased to be with you today. Fascinating discussions so far. And I feel, to start with a disclaimer, a little bit like my good friend Yanis Androutopoulos did last week, regarding my kind of lack of direct involvement in intercultural research. I'm a narrative analyst. And of course, when I was starting out many years ago, the role of culture was a prominent theme in narrative analysis. So some of my early work was indeed about examining culture specificity in Greek everyday storytelling. Since then, as Adam has shown to us very eloquently, identities in storytelling, including cultural identities, are being looked at as intersected, interactionally drafted, and so on. And we have definitely moved away from the capital C culture, as I'm sure you know very well in this group. So what I will present today, albeit indirectly, I hope gets us to think cultural encounters in the social media landscape, because essentially I will be talking about a platform drive for homogeneity in the types of stories we tell and in how we tell them. So let me say how I'll get there. So I want to give you a little context of my work, and this is about this long-standing by now stepping up on social media of curated storytelling. I want to very briefly present the methods for collecting and studying stories as curated activities, and for the analysis by bringing in examples from my work on Instagram stories and my latest work, I got it, on TikTok short form videos. By bringing those examples, I want to show how storytelling curation essentially results in the development and distribution of recognizable, typified, and replicable stories. And I'm going to use the concept of story formatting to describe those types of stories. So I have been tracking the evolution and design of storytelling facilities on major platforms for a very long time now, almost since the inception of platforms such as Facebook. And I have been able to just see in amazement at times this stepping up of social media platforms, from literally offering facilities for storytelling to actually designing stories as multimodal features and integrating them into their features. So platforms really love stories. Why? Well, the power of stories for connecting us with others, making sense of ourselves over time and across space is very well attested. But on social media, we should remember that they're integral to the attention economy and to keeping us hooked. So if we look at the most engaging types of in-feed social content, definitely short-form video, which pretty much means stories as seconds-long glimpses of people's lives, sometimes shared ephemerally and just for 24 hours, has got the lion's share. You can see how text-based posts really are down the list. If we're going to study stories as socio-technical designed activities, we have to take into account the role of affordances. And here I'm really lucky that I'm going second after Adam, and I don't need to explain what affordances are, but I just need to say that, of course, on platforms, there are lots of low-level platform-specific affordances, but there are also some, let's say, cross-platform high-level affordances that are really instrumental in the kinds of content we produce. For instance, the recency and timeliness. This is an algorithmic built-in logic on platforms. The possibility for updating content, ephemerality, distribution, lots of replicability, retrievability, and so on. The amplification and scalability of content, and obviously in vis-a-vis stories as well, this is really important, the multisemioticity of activities, and in stories in particular, their visuality and viewability. So stories are really entangled with technologies, and we are entangled with stories and technologies, as Adam was suggesting, and actually stories are entangled with one another. I almost regretted having used this complicated term in my title, but I thought I should stay with it and get a little help. I know it's being used in cultural studies a lot, but I kind of went back to basics, to quantum physics. And if there is a quantum physicist here, please scream, set the record straight. But the way I understand entanglement from quantum physics, which is really important for what is going on with stories, in particular on platforms, is that it's an emergent relationship that arises from a connection. Well, physicists would say a connection between subatomic particles. And the thing is, once this connection has happened, the constituents of this connection are really defined by the connection. And in some ways, entanglement then reminds us of the Deleuzian concept of assemblage, where you have a relationship that is not necessarily logically necessary, but because of a historical co-evolution, it becomes obligatory. It becomes contingently obligatory. And it also reveals itself, this entanglement, at tiny, quantum physicists would say, subatomic scales, in the case of stories, at tiny even choices and resources at different semiotic levels. And importantly as well, it's not a connection that requires physical proximity. So my initial questions, I have to say, as somebody who came into social media from the study of face-to-face interactional storytelling, were mostly about what it is that gets adapted, reconfigured about storytelling, and how do users then work with those affordances. But of course, as the curation of storytelling increased on social media, my later questions became, let's say, more interrogatory, in the sense that I've been interested in really what it is that becomes amplified, widely available, gets recognized as normative and typical, how and why, and how do users work with this curated storytelling? How do they strategize it, comply with it, or resist it? And what are the implications, in fact, of socialization into a specific way of telling yourself and your life for particularly Gen Zers who are avid users? So I've been really interested in uncovering processes of development of normative practices for telling stories and of recognizability on what a typical story is on different platforms. And this type of typification in sociolinguistics, it's often called enregisterment, tends to go beyond the use of resources or types of discourse and text to the types of identities and self-presentation that, in this case, stories would be effective in constructing. To put differently, it comes with evaluative and moral scripts. So we recognize a particular activity and we frame it as a particular type, but we also recognize personas that are associated with that particular activity and actions that we valorize. So, as I've said, I'm drawing on the originally ethnomethodological concept originating in Garfinkel's work of formatting via the late Jan Blommert's reworking of it for the study of online discourse. Jan left that work in some ways incomplete because of his untimely death, but what I found very interesting in his work and really applicable to the case of stories on social media was how he stressed the point that recognizability of activities, typification of activities online does not hinge on or require sharedness of norms, values, and so on. It does not presuppose pre-existing communities. All it needs is exposure and interaction, however, and participation, however fleeting and ephemeral, in specific social actions. And of course, the other thing you need is also communicative incentives to observe specific norms, specific formats, recognizable formats of action. And those incentives on social media, of course, include audience reach for your content, wide distribution, visibility, and so on. How do we work, though, with formatting in a way that allows us to tap into it over time? I'm looking at the development of norms and the recognizability of norms, and that happens at an astonishing speed, actually, on social media because of affordances and because of a huge promotional machinery that platforms operate with. So I want to capture the historicity of those phenomena and not treat everything as novel. Here we go again. You know, this is new. This is completely new. We haven't seen it before. And I want to have a framework that allows me to uncover context, to use Silverstein's terms, to be able to provide a thick description of the total linguistic fact, which in this case, in my view, very much includes affordances, as I have already said, but also platform discourses, circulating discourses about stories, what a story is, and users' practices. And I have been using, which I will only say one thing about, a technographic approach that draws very much on blended ethnographies and digital ethnographies in order to do some kind of a reversal engineering to tap into the technological workings of platforms and the design tools and functionality that they offer for communication. I have been systematizing tracking in my work, drawing on principles of observation of offline ethnographies in ways in which both for the identification, collection, but also analysis of data allow me to go beyond certain binaries, for instance, platform-centered versus participant-centered approaches, or qualitative versus quantitative approaches, because I have been using corpus-assisted analysis to uncover platform discourses about stories. I've also been using software tools-assisted, essentially application programming interface tools and metrics-based collection of data. What do platforms mean by story? At some point, I started wondering myself, seeing how they were co-opting even the word, the term, and we built a custom made corpus, and which I've written about elsewhere, but a couple of interesting things that came up for us, and this was already 5 years ago, was that if you look at the primary verbal story collocates in our corpus, the Egomedia corpus, and in our reference corpora, for instance, the British National Corpus, you see that very quickly the collocates of tell a story, and here had been departed from in favor of view and watch. So stories not only being designed, curated as visual viewable activities, but also as consumables in a hybrid role between content creation and actually, however active, consumption, as stories, of course, have been primary vehicles for advertising and monetization. And we also so that the semantic fields of specific words were very interesting in that we were systematically finding a coming together, a conflation, if you want, of relational, affective words about storytelling, things like interaction, experience, and engagement, and relationship, and also quantification, marketing words, and that again spoke to the hybrid status of storytelling as a content creation, but also essentially a vehicle for marketing and advertising. How do I analyze stories as multisemiotic activities? Very briefly, I draw on a practice-based heuristic that I developed for storytelling in face-to-face contexts, which is about forging links between ways of telling, and those include all kinds of semiotic resources, sites. These are the social worlds of both the tales, but also the tellings of stories, and tellers in a very broad sense of communicators. And I combine this with positioning analysis that actually addresses this question of, at the end of the day, when I tell a story in whichever medium and context, what is it that I communicate about me? Who am I? How do I present myself through this story? I have somewhat needed to reposition positioning in order to be able to study both curated activities where affordances play a big role, and multimodal, multisemiotic activities. But essentially, I'm still working with these 3 levels that allow us to see self as a character interacting with others in time and space, in tales, but also self in relation to actual imagined and intended audiences, and self in relation to identity projects and circulated story lines that, of course, can be invoked as shared, promoted, but also spoken against and resisted. I've had a study. I've conducted a study of Instagram stories, influencers Instagram stories, and one of the things that I did in terms of the multimodal analysis there was to try and document recurrent iterative choices across different modes and links across levels. So just to give a very brief example, when I look at ways of telling in positioning level 1, I would be looking at a host of things from visual aesthetics to graphemic choices, emojis, linguistic choices in captions. So the microanalysis is at the very nitty-gritty of the stories. In terms of analytical headlines, there are lots of features that these stories have that remind us of what in my previous work called small stories. So it seems that social media platforms have really thrown a lot of resources and a lot of design into this production and prompting to users to tell small stories. And what it is about small stories in these features, particularly the fact that they're anchored onto the here and now, the moment, and also that they are densely indexical, allusive, and intertextual. What it is that that attracts, of course, that they are also brief and portable, that attracts platforms to these features is that they work very well with the attention economy and the algorithmic preferences of timeliness and updating. So an overarching story formatted practice here is the idea of sharing life in the moment. And what happens with this practice, which I will say a little bit about in the next few slides, is that it tends to be used as a resource for constructing authentic selves and lives. So there is a recognizability of this is the type of story you need to tell, and there is also a framing of this type of story as an authentic story. And there is an invitation to the audience, and we'll see that with some comments on TikTok videos, because obviously on Instagram stories we don't have access to comments, to stories. There is also an invitation to the audience to validate such stories as authentic. And by authentic here, we really mean raw, non-filtered, the teller showing us the off-the-cuff experience of their everyday, all the banal little moments, and the kind of underbelly. What we find here is that the present tense temporality is at the heart of the formatting of sharing life in the moment. It really fits well, as I've said, with the attention economy. It encourages frequent postings, and specific types of small stories we can see have emerged in response, which are well suited to reporting on the here and now. These names, formulations, are used often in captions of stories, in around 1/3 actually of the analyzed stories, to frame them as particular types of activities. There is a lot of temporality of immediacy that we see also in captions with temporal adverbs that stress the immediacy of the tellings. And of course, you have domestic and informal settings, everyday outings with friends, storytelling on the go, but also the teller depicted in intimate surroundings. This is all part of authenticating self, as we can see in good morning and good night stories that somehow punctuate the beginning and end of postings for a given day, because remember, unless you save them, these stories last for 24 hours. Now, the formatting of sharing life in the moment presents particular intermodal densities in the ways in which different semiotic modes work together to establish recognizability of the activity. Now, in Carrie Jewett's terms, modal density essentially refers to the amount of space a particular mode occupies and to how specific signs in different modes are ordered. So certain modes can be privileged in specific acts of communication, for instance, in terms of frequency of use and of the functions they serve. So what I'm finding here is that I'm finding formatted connections amongst different modalities. So story captions, for instance, seem to tell, evaluate, assess the point of the story, while the pics and videos show, record, enact, and perform it. And then in videos, particularly, we also have the narrator as following an unfolding scene, for instance, and allowing the viewer's subjective camera views, which I don't have time to illustrate. But what's interesting is that within the visual and video modes, there is a formatted use of what I have collectively characterized as amateur aesthetics, and this includes unflattering close-ups of the tellers, grainy photographs, lack of filters, supported by captions that actually draw attention to the lack of filters, tilted angles in camera placement, inclusion of tellers' body parts to stress filming on the go with the handheld smartphone, and so on. And all this helps with the presentation of an authentic self. Now, Jan Blomert stressed that formats should not be imagined as closed boxes, and instead that their indexical orders can be evolving and contingent upon the work performed by participants. And I have been able to document, he was talking obviously very synchronically about specific acts of communication. I have been in a position to document the evolution of story formatting over time and across platforms in the historicized way that the method of technography offers. And I have specifically attested to two connected types of evolution. One, which I call repurposing, which is mainly user-driven, and this refers to actually users expanding on the content within a specific format and strategizing their self-presentation in relation to algorithms and affordances. And the other evolution is that of reconfiguring, which is mainly platform-driven and involves evolving the affordances and tailoring formats to specific algorithmic environments. So to take each separately, of course, influencers very much rely on those story formats, be they countdowns, breaking news, or the documenting everyday life, present tense temporality formats, not just to convey their everydayness, but also to self-brand and promote their products. But the other thing that I found using data from the same influencers during the pandemic in a comparative study of their stories, I also found that they were repurposing present tense moment-based story formats to serve, of course, the new realities of being spatially confined and add new content. And in this study, I also noted a consolidation of this authentication of self through the intermodal densities of amateur aesthetic, for instance, with a huge, during the pandemic, rise of ugly selfies. Now, if we look at what is going on TikTok, which notably became very, very popular, hugely popular during the pandemic. Now, the reconfiguration of sharing life in the moment formats in TikTok short form videos, where storytelling trends are still built on the moment, it's in the present tense, is notable in the ways in which there is an extension from sharing my moment to sharing a moment, indicating a shift towards temporally unspecified or habitual content and generic stories, often in second-person narration. A little bit like this, when you block his phone number and so on. this type of reconfiguration, before I illustrate it, just to say that it does work well with the recommendation algorithms of TikTok and the For You page, which, as Abidin has claimed, somehow signal a move from poster-based to post-based algorithmic prioritizations. So in other words, you have to ensure there that your post, this post, becomes searchable and widely distributed. And the searchability then, that specific uses of sound, memes, phrasing in captions, descriptions, images, and so on, creates on TikTok pushy stories towards this mimification. And this is attestable in the creation of trends. So we have previously photographic, static memes with, let's say, influencers, celebrities, such as this one. We have them now transplanted into the multimodal ecology of TikTok, now depicting their content creators to tell stories of recognizable and relatable experiences. And we find that these moment-based scenarios present wide distribution and replicability across languages and cultures. So this replicability includes direct translations first of all, what we are also finding is, before we get there to other languages, is an astonishing extension of the formatting of such stories, becoming productive in specifying and deriving broader trends. For instance, here, connecting with another trend, point of view. We find a person of narration extension from your to my and our. We also find an enregisterment around those stories of specific characterological figures, as Aga would say, as specific types or personas with specific moral attributions. For instance, the Middle Eastern patient, in the data that we are looking at, we find a lot the toxic, overprotective, controlling mother. So the formatted practice then of sharing life in the moment is extending by developing multiple indexical orders, inclusive of some audiences while excluding others, which aligns with the sociolinguistic typification processes. So here is a set scenario. Let me try and illustrate something before I finish. A parent getting carried away by hearing a 90s song from their youth while doing everyday chores in the kitchen or in the car, giving an impromptu performance in front of a despairing teenage child, normally son. There are stereotypes that are drawn upon here to depict this intergenerational conflict when it comes to music tastes. And of course, the Gen Zers and registered affective responses to this is, cringy, cringe making, and so on. Whoever is a parent of a Gen Zer will know what I mean. So let me play this for you a little bit. Oops, sorry. Okay. Let me play this at least. It's the same, but it's in Italian. The formulation. If I had played the other Rhythm is a Dancer video, you would have seen exactly the same breakthrough into performance by the mother. In that case, the child was real for as much as I could attest, and not a dual role casting, which we saw here, which is also quite frequently used in videos. But what we are currently with a colleague, Ruth Page, what we are studying in terms of this formatting is of when stories that particularly involve family members and told from the perspective of a child, we are studying them with a view to seeing in different languages what is presented as recognizable and typical.
When you take a step back and you look at the severity of the situation, yeah, is it that deep?
So that's one of our examples, and we have been collecting these when scenarios in different languages as well. I can't give you more detail. We have a huge Excel with different types of microanalytic coding, because of course we want to analyze them as multimodal. Their description is very, very interesting. Their descriptions, one pattern that is emerging from their descriptions is that they are framed as real, you know, Q authenticity, the trans-platform migration of authenticity, and also as relatable. And the audiences essentially are invited to validate this relatability of tales, which is what they actually do. This is a microanalysis in positioning level 1. That's the nitty-gritty that I was talking about before. And this is what we use. We use the anocaps and the other captions as a basis for actually trying to look at intermodal densities that I was talking about, the salient recurrent interactions with other modalities. Now, again, there is an astonishing replication of tales, tellings, and tellers, not just exact translation of the captions and the anocaps, but also the same scenario, the same type of description of the story, the same visuals, the same lyrics, the same type of comments, validating the relatability of the story, doing recognizability. So here, for instance, this is the video I played for you. You can see hashtag relatable, for real, for real. It took me one morning to decipher FRRRR. An Urban Dictionary even wasn't helping. Now, this is an excerpt of comments from from a Greek TikTok video, and again, you know, this word means I can relate, but also with the Greek alphabet we see relate. The word relate. I'm not going to talk to you about initial findings, which really reaffirm the power of the story formatting and the valuations that it produces in. I can't get you out of my brain. There's another. Oh, it's such a shame that we don't talk anymore. So this is a particular type of format. I can't get you out of my brain. And it's different to this type of format, which I haven't got time to talk about because I need to move to my conclusion, which is I have tried to show how story formatting in my technographic exploration of the evolution of storytelling facilities on social media platforms has emerged from this entanglement, right, of ongoing connections of discourses and affordances with users' communicative practices. There's discourses surrounding the sociotechnicity of authentic sharing in the moment through present tense. Multimodal stories have become intricately woven with metalinguistic markings, affordances provided by platforms, and and practices of content creators. I have specifically shown the templatization of form and content based on intermodal densities. And I have also shown how the power of the formatting of stories is attestable in user-driven repurposings and platform-driven reconfigurations. Now, it's interesting as a kind of a concluding speculative point, traveling stories across linguistic and cultural boundaries have always faced inherent challenges, requiring a nuanced approach to elicit empathy, for instance, as Amy Schumann has argued. And in fact, Jan Blommert's early work was very effective in highlighting the difficulties in picking up intricate contextualization cues, for example, in asylum applications, assessment settings. And of course, we have Gompers's work. Now, this study on formatting shows that uses contextualization strategies involve working with media forms that actually transcend those boundaries, and often achieving this through memification, a process of actually replicating experiences, responses, and languages across contexts. I was thinking the other day, as we navigate the challenges of this type of formatted storytelling, that it would be fascinating to consider, to speculate what scholars such as Gompertz and Blommert would have made of this phenomenon, and even how they would have identified a dark side that accompanies this reliance on story formats, the risk that may be stifling individual creativity, becoming so easily collectivizable, drawing on and dishing out stereotypes. Now, at the same time, there is a democratization of access to resources, at least if you have access to the digital, which more and more people are having, that these formats allow, that kind of flattens the pretextual gaps or the preconditions that Blommert was talking about, allowing users to effect changes perhaps in direction and content, and enabling stories to become powerful tools for activism and putting causes on the map. So there is a tension between the drive for homogeneity and the user's agentive power in achieving context expansion. And to my mind, to somehow connect us a little bit with last week's session, this raises important questions about the future of storytelling and storytellers in an era that's increasingly dominated by Jena. For now, what I would say is that it is an undeniable fact, and I'll let you ponder this, that this multimodal small story format has earned a very, very prominent place in the canonical genres of everyday life storytelling, particularly for Gen Zers. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry if I have overrun.
No problem at all, Alex. Great. So we do have time for a discussion.
Stop sharing.
Questions by the audience. Thank you so much. Super interesting. Well, I think I'll just ask one question, and it's a point I would like both of you to discuss, really. So it's not really like one very direct question, but it's a point that features in both of your types of analysis and the data you show and your findings, which is the emergence of norms. Yeah, and then I see that methodologically, even though there is this point you mentioned, Alex, that formatting also draws from ethnomethodology, which is pretty much Adam's overarching framework for the conversation analytic analysis of interaction. But I'd like to ask you, which similarities do you see in these approaches that you presented today? Which differences, and if those kinds of analysis are reconcilable? Because, so for example, from Adam, and from the whole ethnomethodological conversation analytic enterprise, there is a very bottom-up kind of approach where the norms are really created as like through interaction, and the analyst will probably want to focus there. Whereas for the sociolinguistic enterprise, you have a different approach, which might be top-down, bottom-up together. So actually, I don't want to, I want to see your points of view on norm creation from both perspectives, and you might want to engage in conversation with each other as well about this point. Feel free to take the floor when whoever feels like starting, kicking us off.
I'm happy to go first, Alex. Just to I think there's a few really interesting points all tied in together there, Milady. So I'll probably miss something, but just on the different kinds of analysis and whether they're reconcilable, I think it's more of a methodological observation, but I think it depends what we mean by reconcilable. So I guess the objective analysis for the two presentations we've seen today are very different objects that are being analyzed. And if we hypothetically said, well, I don't think it would be possible to apply conversation analysis to TikTok videos because we don't have that sequentiality. But the other way around, applying Alex's methods to my data, I think potentially is probably more possible. And obviously there is sociolinguistic research and ethnographic research on spoken interaction. So I guess the question is, when we say reconcilable, do we mean that they can be done together in the same study? Or do we mean that they can sit side by side as two separate sets of analysis of the same context? And I think if we're looking at different lenses at looking at the same thing, then I think that can only be a good thing. And I think my sense from being, and maybe it's different when you're a student to when you're an academic or when you're a researcher, but I feel like 20 years ago when I was a student, 15 years ago when I was a student, it's not that long ago, 15 years ago when I was a student, there was a bit more kind of defending your methodological camp. And there's a bit more like, this is the way that you do research. And if you do it another way, then you can. And maybe that's because you're a student and you're more tied to it. Or maybe there's just a bit more of an openness within the academy now than there used to be. But I think the perspective that I come across the most is that if we have lots of different lenses on the same phenomena, that can only be a good thing, that we can look at things in different ways. And cumulatively, we'll reach some kinds of sets of observations. So I think that the methodological thing, I think the more different lenses we have to look at something, the better. Absolutely. Just a quick observation on the emergence of norms as well. And it made me think about the original definition of meme, which is that, a kind of cultural practice or an element of behavior which is transmittable from one person to another. And I think both things seem to apply in Alex's, the TikTok video thing, where you can see certain practices are being adapted and applied. And I'm not on TikTok, so I only very occasionally see TikTok videos if they're kind of in the news or whatever. But I recognize some of the practices there where you have, for example, a music video playing, and then at the point that the lyrics start, the TikTok storyteller then mouths along with the lyrics. That's something that's instantly recognizable to me as a TikTok specific practice. And so presumably consumers of these stories observe them and then adapt them, and that's how these kind of things spread in the kind of historical sense of meme. And I guess that we saw similar in my data set as well, where practices for communicating in certain settings might be specific. So when a certain group of people join a Zoom room, they might behave in a certain way, but then I think you'll get that adaptive practices passed on to the next. So, one of us kind of communicates in a certain way on Zoom, somebody else picks up on that and then takes that into another Zoom meeting, and then somebody within that Zoom meeting picks up on that practice and takes it into another. And so it spreads in that kind of meme-like way in spoken practice, as well as in the kind of multimodal storytelling that Alex was showing us. So sorry, the two kind of slightly rambly answers to two of your questions, but really interesting points, I think.
No, that's I absolutely agree with you, Adam. And look, I think on the synchronic type of level, on the how do we analyze this act of communication here and now, and on the understanding that lots of scaled, non-synchronous contexts will somehow fold onto the here and now, you might find that we have a lot of compatibilities in terms of our analytical tools, and certainly I do approach videos holistically, and I showed you with TikTok, we are still at the beginning, and already we're having to engage with various kinds of microanalysis at various levels. If you look at our microanalysis of comments, when we get there, it'll look very much like what, despite the fact that, you know, sequentiality is difficult to establish. Okay, but there is, of course, a thriving online conversation analysis at this point, which we can draw on to look at the comments. So there's those compatibilities there, and I guess the other thing I would say is, again, picking up on Adam's points, is that I'm interested. The reason as to why I move somehow beyond this single act of communication is that I'm interested in the historicity, the intertextuality, the dialogicality, the kind of webs of story linking that we see in all contexts, and particularly on social media. And it is a process of documenting iterativity over time. And a lot of the times it is documentation over real time. You can do critical time, you can do apparent time, but you know, I have had the luxury and the age, the years to be able to also do some real time tracking, which of course goes well with this methodological / let's say epistemological ethnographic approach.
Very
I
interesting.
wonder if I could just ask a question about Alex's presentation, which might tie into what we're just saying, or it might be slightly different. But one of the things that strikes me, especially with the POV ones, or the when this happens, you know, when your mom does this, you react. And it seems to me that probably one of the aims there is relatability, right? It's how can this story, how can I make the story as relatable as possible to as many people as possible, and that can transcend kind of cultural groups as well. And as a total novice to this kind of area of social practice, I was just wondering if you think that is that the kind of ultimate aim, is that, or one of the ultimate aims of producing some of this content is, can I make this as relatable as possible so that as many people engage with it as possible and kind of align with it or agree with it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is, look, because there's a lot of reflexivity, there's a heightened reflexivity around norms online anyway. So these stories, as I showed in one slide with, you know, a snapshot of descriptions of stories, they're very specifically and explicitly framed as relatable. And of course, as narrative analysts, we're very interested in what kinds of manipulations of verbal and visual resources you need to do in order to build your tale as generic, relatable, beyond the personal. And we're finding some very interesting things there in terms of deixis, which arguably is an erudite thing to look at, but it is a small thing. I think as a conversation analyst, you would agree, Adam, that it is a small thing that allows us, though, to make potentially some big points about what is happening, for instance, right now, vis-a-vis the ownership of personal experience. Because something else that we are seeing is a complete and utter destabilizing of the personal versus the collective storytelling. So that has, of course, important implications, and not just for narrative analysis. Or the other thing that we are seeing is a mutation of, there's always been satirical bringing together of stories, of incongruous stories, which in some earlier work I have termed as rescripting. But on TikTok and generally through the modality of a short form video, we are seeing rescripting processes being taken to extremes, but not in random ways, in pattern ways, again, which create recognizability about particular types of stories and particular types of personas and particular lyrics and particular sounds. So all this is very interesting in terms of what voice, amongst other things, really means in storytelling in those arenas.
Very interesting. Though I'm afraid I have to stop you guys there to give the audience. I'm sure you would have thousands of other questions to each other, but I would also like to give the audience the chance to ask questions. I'm pretty sure, so I see already some cues in the chat.